law didn't permit that. And we went to Congress and got it changed. And so instead of career stop at lieutenant commander, they went on to command, and we have 4-star admirals that are now NFOs, which never would have happened otherwise.
That's awesome.
So just to let you know, a little strangeness there that as I got more senior, I stayed in the aviation world, but I became an NFO, and that didn't change what I did outside of flying. In flying, I managed those things that the NFO was particularly qualified to do. But as far as staff and command and that sort of thing, I had command of a ship, a lot of things. I was in for longer than any other Navy captain I know. I served for 37 years. So that's unique. So ask questions, go ahead, it's your program.
Okay. What is the wing commander? You were the wing commander of the Kitty Hawk.
Yes.
What does the wing commander do?
He's in charge of all of the squadrons. You have a commanding officer of each squadron that has its own type of aircraft and its own crew, the fixers, the people that manage move you around the ship, and all that sort of thing from the ground. And the pilot has responsibility as a division officer to oversee some of this, so he has something to do besides just flying. But when he's flying, he's aided by these guys that maintain your airplane and help you get into the air. They're there to see you when you come back, etc.
That's pretty cool.
Do you
You
guys
ready,
want
Malika?
alternate? However you wanna do it, you guys decide,
Yeah,
or you wanna do
you
yours.
fight that out yourself. I'm out of that one.
So what's your full name?
Pardon me?
What's your full name?
Oh, my full name is Elmer Royce Williams.
Now,
My dad's
he
name-
doesn't hear well, so make sure you talk loud.
Yeah.
Okay.
My dad's name was Elmer, and he christened me his name, but never called me that. I was always called Royce. So my official signature is E. Royce Williams, and I go by call Royce. Yeah, he asked me my birth year, 1925, almost 100 years ago.
Wow. When is your birthday?
It was just this last
Pardon?
week.
When is your birthday? Your birthday.
Birth date?
Yeah, when is your birth date?
We just had it, April 4th.
Uh,
We've been celebrating here for several days.
Yeah.
You can see all this stuff around here.
oh yeah.
That's Tammy the wizard. She knows and how to do everything. Smart lady, looks after me.
Oh.
So, why'd you want to be in the Navy?
It might have been influence of relatives who were in the Navy. I never knew an officer in the Navy who I knew enlisted relatives that were Navy or Marine. I had, I believe, intended to go into the Marine Corps. But my brother got commissioned ahead of me, and I asked him for his recommendation. He didn't, don't let any of my friends know this, but I think you'd be better off in the Navy. And so when I finished flying and I chose what commission, I chose Navy. I served a lot with Marines. They served a lot with me. I had command of a ship with a Marine unit on board with a Marine captain in charge. And I had the command ship for the Pacific Fleet, and so I had generals with their staff on board, and Navy admirals, and even a Korean Commodore. Commodore in the British Navy and civil are equal to our Rear Admiral, we call lower half. It's a long story, and I was responsible for a lot of it because I recommended when we went from a change of designating 2 stars for all Rear Admirals, but we were cheating. We did this because we would be in charge of task force with British and other countries, and we wanted to be sure we always have overall in charge. So to outrank, look like the Commodore, we called him Admiral, although pay grade and so forth the same, but they wore 2 stars. Army and Air Force, and maybe the Marine Corps, however, they never complained, all have brigadier generals, and that's a 1 star. And they were not happy that the Navy was using this 2 star as it affected them too, because if they were in a staff or meeting together, they would have usually a 3 star admiral or general in charge of the whole room. And all of the captains with eagles or colonels, same rank, would sit along the wall. And then at the table would be those with stars. The Navy captain, when promoted to Rear Admiral, put on 2 stars and normally would be at the end of the table, but because he's wearing 2 stars, they moved him on up as though he were just senior to the senior brigadier general. So it was phony, and he got a 2 star place to park and all of the bennies that went with this thing, yet officially he was not. So when I, the head of the promotion plans in the Navy at Bureau of Naval Personnel, got the law changed to where the Air Force had to use the Navy Marine law for promotion. They didn't before, and they were doing some trickery stuff that they shouldn't. So they had to follow the Navy Marine law, and we had to make our, I called them Commodore, and for several years they were Commodore and they were a 1 star. And they complained and said that, you know, the Air Force and Army don't call their brigadier general brigadier, they call him general. We want to be called admiral. So after they fussed enough, we changed it, so we call them admiral, and they'd wear 1 star, and they'd be parked in the proper place, and all things worked out okay. Enough of that.
Okay, it's true.
Maybe I didn't answer the question. You want more of it? Just poke me in the eye or something. Get me going.
Well, so what were you doing before, during, and after the war?
was a student. A lot of times I worked on farms. My father ran a grocery store and I worked for that, but I started very early working for my uncles. My mother's last name before marriage was Foss, like Joe Foss or a lot of other Fosses. Came from a family of 13 children, so there were a lot of farmers around that area, and I working for relatives, and I started very young, 8 years old, so working on farms, and I continued to do it through high school, and sometimes they needed help, and there wasn't any other available. They would come to the school superintendent and see if I could be excused to go out and work on the farm. Because when grains are ready to be harvested, you gotta do it right now. You can't go too long or they spoil. So I did that.
But he didn't miss school because he ended up being his school valedictorian in high school. So he was a good enough student that they let him do that.
Also, during off time, I had an uncle that ran a resort on a very large lake, 36 miles long, but about 2 miles wide. It was like a big river, and I worked for him, selling bait and boats and providing seining and getting authorized small fish for minnows for bait, looking after the boats, keeping them clean and that. And I enjoyed it. I liked swimming and fishing, and this gave me opportunity to participate in those things.
And I'm sorry, where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Wilmot, South Dakota. Let me show you something here. Pass this around. You look first, give it to him, and then let the guy see it.
Where did you say you grew up again?
Where?
Where did you say you grew up again?
Wilmot, South Dakota, until I was 11. And then my dad moved just around the lake, which was the border for Minnesota, and I continued and got my high school and so forth in Minnesota. Town called Clinton, Clinton. And there, one thing I did was chum with a local barnstormer pilot who had a Travel Air open cockpit bi-wing airplane, and he used to sell tickets, and I'd go around to county fairs with him to sell tickets for plane rides, and which is what I love doing. I got into aviation. My first ride, I was 4 years old in a Ford tri-motor out of a pasture in South Dakota with my grandmother, who was 80 years old. Her first flight and my first flight.
When did you receive this?
Oh, what I wanted to show you, I should have told you before, is on this side, there's an outline, almost a rectangle, and that is
South Dakota.
that is South Dakota
Shape of the state.
design. And there's a star where Wilmot is located.
That's cool.
Oh, okay.
When did they award you this? Is this a memorial? When did-
Tammy, you tell them.
That's not an award, that is called a challenge coin.
Okay.
And many of the military, have them. You saw Top Gun Maverick, yes? When he first goes into that bar and he didn't have a coin and he got stuck with that big bar bill, they would keep it in their pocket. And if the challenge came and you didn't have a coin, you paid. So
Okay.
it's become a kind of a fun way for them to express their career through that. We designed that coin ourselves when he got the Navy Cross. He has a bunch in a table over here from all sorts of people, even congressmen, even the Secretary of the Navy, the Blue Angels commander. It'll be fun for you to look at. So we designed that one with our special interests in mind. Captain Williams, where he was born, both sets of his wings, like he told you before. He was the one who got the command changed. Otherwise, the last several commanders wouldn't have ever been able to be in those positions. He has certain aircraft that he started with and ended with, and just kind of your story, however you want to present your coin to people. And of course, we got the Navy Cross, and he loves the American flag.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed on the way in, there's a table with a glass top.
Yeah, I'll show him after.
Okay. Challenge coins.
Yeah, just a fun way to display
Oh,
all the
I-
ones you get, but it has to be given by a handshake.
Another thing that is on here is on the far left, the N3N, the first airplane that I flew by myself, soloing. It's open cockpit, biplane, propeller driven airplane, and I kept on through numerous other airplanes. I got my wings, and I was flying Hellcats, and I'm the carrier, and it went on and on and on. So on the far right is a Phantom, an F4 that I flew in combat. The little one I'd fly at about 80 to 100 miles an hour at about 8,000 feet. And in the Phantom, at Mach 2, I went to 76,000 feet. Very few people in the world have done that.
Hmm.
So that's why they're on there.
Before you go, I'd love for you to take the picture of the table or look at it, some fun stuff.
And the Phantom does that have another name? The Phantom?
F4.
F4, okay.
It's a two-seater, twin-engine jet. And it played a very large part in the Vietnam War.
Okay.
It served probably 15 different nations: Australia, Denmark, eventually Germany, British, and in our country, Air Force, Marines, and Navy. It had some problems at one point where it had a double engine fire. And when that happened, the crew, pilot and rear seater, all ejected. We didn't get any back to find out why. Well, I went on a mission out of Key West, Florida, to shoot down missiles with a missile. And I did that at altitude and went in, and when I docked it down, I went into a big victory roll, and on the top of that, bang, bang, and two engines on fire, smoke going out, all the indicators for fire and temperature pegged. I could see why the others jumped. But I came back on the power thinking it might ease the problem, and I started using my altitude for distance to get back to the base, and also not amplify the problem by pouring more fuel. And when I got on down low and still had a lot of distance, I came up on the power and it was hardly any done. I had my backseater eject, and we're getting near the base, and there was an Air Force helicopter coming from Homestead Air Force Base. They based below Miami on the real peninsula in Florida, and they saw this happening, and they said, airplane on fire, we see your backseater, we'll pick him up. Well, I got on down now where I'm trying, it's very iffy, and I'm in full power and I'm still losing. I had to go into afterburner in 2 engines, which normally would have made me go lickety split. But I just barely got it back and landed on the base. And so they finally got an airplane back to investigate, and engineers came from all over the world, and they studied it for about 2 months, and they found the problem, fixed it, and never more happened. So that was kind of a biggie.
Yeah, so that was the plane that you flew that they were able to study and landed safely. Wow.
And when I got down, they were foaming it, and all the fire trucks and everything there. And the guy drove the duty car from operations on out to the airplane to pick me up. And I got out, going over to it, and he says, "We don't have to stick around here, do we?" And I said, "No." But he wanted to excuse himself out of there right away. Well, I got back to operations, and my radar intercept officer was already back. He beat me. I jumping out and coming in a helicopter.
So how high were you when you flew the what was it called? When you flew at Mach 2, how high were you?
76,000. Well, I did it at other altitudes too, but I'm just pointing out that's an extreme altitude. And the way I got there was to use the maximum power and speed, and use a lot of it just momentum with full power going to climb to get to that point. And at that point, it flamed out, and I wasn't going any higher. And the pressure dropped in the cockpit, and I was wearing a moon suit, pressure suit, and it popped, and I was Michelin Man there for a while, and started on down, and when I got a lower altitude, got a restart, and came back. I've had dumb things happen. One of them, I was on exchange duty with the Air Force for a couple of years, and I was flying F-86s. And normally I'm instructing students from all over the world. One of the best air-to-ground pilots that I taught was from Turkey. One of the best air-to-air pilots I taught was from Taiwan. A Chinese guy that was flying 86s in Taiwan and patrolling the Taiwan Straits between there and China, and there was an understanding, and most of the time they would come out to a certain point of threat and turn around and go back. He had engaged them a couple of times and had shot down two Chinese navies. Same type of airplane I shot down. Over. Help.
Help.
Any
What
other
else do you guys wanna
questions?
know? So you started asking about how old he was, because he was in the Army when he was 16. Then he was in 2 years later, went to the Navy, right? Navy aviation
Yeah,
after.
I was in the Army to start.
So just for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for
As
the
a
16.
corporal in the infantry.
So do you guys want to know about boot camp? Do you want to know about why? You already asked why he joined for duty. He had family that also was in the armed forces.
So how was the boot camp? Was it hard, or
How hard was what?
how hard was like the boot camp training for the Army or for the Navy?
It was called basic training at Camp Ripley, Minnesota. It's way up north, right where the Mississippi River starts. No, I had done a lot of hunting, a lot of shooting, a lot of hiking. I was an Eagle Scout, so I had done a whole lot of that sort of thing anyway. I enjoyed the service, and it was not difficult. When I went in the Navy, it was more difficult. That was boot camp, and because of my experience, they put me in positions of leadership right from the start. Matter of fact, I was on KP one time. I don't know, I saw my name on the list, and I went to the kitchen in our military restaurant, and my superior came in, and somebody says, Williams, what are you doing here? I said, I have KP. No, you don't. You go back here. You don't have to stay on KP. So I was treated pretty well right from the start.
You might have to tell these boys what KP duty was.
KP duty is helping out in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, and cleaning up, and that sort of thing.
I've got one for you.
Hmm?
So I said I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, knowing that boys are by nature mischievous, what was the mischievous things that you might have done? Like you see on the movies, like Top Gun, he does the flyby the tower. Did you do anything out of the norm like that?
I did a whole lot of that. It happens in those days. There were no boundaries on a lot of things. Go out with my pals. We went out to a little creek that was feeding this big lake, and we decided to dam it up on a farmer's property without his permission. And it even found one of his old plows that was horse-drawn and put it in as part of our structure. And then that was our swimming pool. And my brother did the double thing. We're always, who is going to be the first one to swim in the broken ice water? Well, I didn't do it. My brother did. And we built a fire and warmed him up, but he was awfully cold, miserable. My first two catapults were not from an aircraft carrier. On the farm, one of my uncles had a son that's a few years older than me, and he had one horse that they used to ride, named Blackie. And I got on him and I tried to make him run. He always did for my cousin. And I told him, I can't make him run. Well, he took a strap and hit him, and that horse took off in a straight line toward nothing, just going. And he came to a creek that served the lake down there again, Big Stone Lake. And the horse saw that and he put on his brakes, and I went whoosh, right over his mane and head and landed down. The gully was cut maybe 4 feet from just the water running every spring. And I landed down there amongst the rocks and everything. Not good. I was driving a team of horses with a hay rack, taking bundles of grain and fill it on up real high and then take it to wherever to thrash it. It was lunchtime and all the rest of the crew went to the farmer's house, which was probably about a mile away, for lunch. And I told him, well, I wanted to finish loading first and then I'd come in. There was a railroad track going just beyond this property. And it had an abutment coming up to it, probably raising it maybe 8-10 feet above the other terrain. And the train came by and whistled, and it scared my horses, and they took off right at the railroad track, coming in at 90 degrees to it, and the tongue, part of the hay rack that connects, and the horses are, and their harnesses are connected to that, and that pulls the whole apparatus. Well, it runs on back and is finally attached in the middle of the hay rack, at the center of it. Well, as they were running across and going over this track and stuff, the tongue, which is a big wooden piece, strong, dug into the side of that hill, and it broke the hay rack in half. And the part that I finally worked my way up to grab the reins and control, as that broke, and the wheels are down here, and this took that, broke in front half of the rack and went like this, and it flipped me in the air to where I'd say 30 or 40 feet. I flew over the track and coming down on grass on the far side, which kept me from being destroyed. But that was my second catapult. And then I really started catapulting on aircraft carriers. That's not mischief. That's the jobs I was doing. But I had a mischief too. Yeah.
How did that feel to get catapulted off a aircraft carrier?
Initially,
Yeah.
it's a little scary, and you get used to it.
Yeah.
And
Because
I
you
did
go
it a lot of times. I took my initial carrier qualification on the USS Ranger CV-4, the first aircraft carrier ever built from the keel up as an aircraft carrier. And you've heard of McCain's? Well, Captain McCain was the commanding officer who eventually made admiral as he retired and was McCain 1. McCain 2, his son, eventually became an admiral, and he was Sink Pack. senior military command in all of the Pacific, all services. I had worked a little for him because at one point I was the head of prison war matters for the Navy. And their son, McCain III, was shot down and was a POW. And I knew as much as anybody, pretty much any American, about how he was treated and reported to the Admiral about that. But I was assigned there to relieve my brother. And it was his 30th year, mine too. But he was on the staff, and I came aboard as his numerical relief. The next day, he went from uniform to shorts and an aloha shirt and go-aheads, and ran a swimming pool business for the next 10 years on Oahu. And I took over, not his job, but I had a better job, or more senior job. Eventually, I was selected to be the first Inspector General sick back. I wrote the instructions, the rules, and finally wrote myself some orders when I was prepared enough, and went to Thailand to inspect, I think, what was it? Anyway, running the Vietnam War. And so I'm a Navy captain, and I come out to inspect his command. Well, I was met in Bangkok by one of his junior admirals, generals, and private plane flew me on back, and he said, you know, the general would like to see you on arrival. I assumed, because this was the first time we had ever had a St. Pac Inspector General or inspectors of these type of commands. And I was far junior, but I was representing St. Pac for Admiral. And on arrival, I went in and met him and told him what I was there for, and that I would show him my report and let him see it before I left, so he wouldn't worry that I was saying something bad about me. But anyway, that was a pretty interesting part of my career. I was relieved from that job by the most senior Air Force Major General in the Pacific. And I'd been running the shop as a Navy captain. And evermore, there's a two-star always running it.
Can you tell the boys about this picture?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was hoping
Do
you'd
you
get
know
to that.
anything about it?
Do they know anything about it?
I had Warren read a little bit about it, but
Yeah.
Are you aware of what that is?
18
Yeah,
November,
Mark-
1952?
Mark Clausen.
Huh?
I interviewed Mark Clausen. You know him?
Mark Clausen.
Mark Clausen.
I don't think I know. What about him?
He showed me that picture. And he.
Oh,
told
he
me-
showed you this.
Yeah.
Oh,
so do they serve together?
Ah.
How do they know each other?
well,
Well, yeah.
I think I know Mark from the Legion. That's where I know Mark.
He was a Seabees.
Yeah. He gave me the hat.
okay.
We
Yeah.
know him from the Legion Hall.
Yeah, no, I was kind of an original of the Seabees as well. I have a brother-in-law that was a big CB, and it really helped him when he got out right after the war. And President Eisenhower came up with the building of the interstate road network, and he got a job in Wisconsin working there for many years on the roads.
Here, look closely. You can ask him about what happened.
What are you looking at there? That same picture?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, that is a panther, and there are 263 holes in it. And I was the pilot, and we were in Korea. And our normal location put us at the 38th parallel, which is a dividing between North and South Korea, and this is during the Korean War. And so I was flying missions, normally air to ground, close air support with the Marines and the Army, and anti-logistics and shooting up trains and trucks and tracks and storage areas and that sort, and the ground air control supporting the ground forces. Well, Admiral Jocko Clark was on the USS Missouri, a battleship, which was the command of the Task Force 77, which I was a part of. And he said pretty much enough already. We were unable to hit some of the real juicy targets that are farther north and out of our range. So he put together 3 carriers and 20-some support ships, mostly destroyers, as escorts. And in the dead of night, we went up on the 17th of November 1952. And off of Chongjin, a major port city in North Korea, about 100 miles south of Vladivostok, Russia. And I was on the first flight in the morning, and all 3 carriers are sending missions in to hit their manufacturing and their warehousing, that sort of thing. And when I got back to the ship, I was told by the duty officer to get a quick bite because I was on the next flight, which would be a combat air patrol. Combat air patrol are airplanes that the mission is to fly in defense of other forces. And with all these in this area, be a good idea to give them protection. So I had a quick lunch, briefing, and went to launch with 3 other F-5 Panthers, like that airplane up there. And you see several others around here. They're like my shoes. My shoes. Oh, she's going to show
The
you.
kids have been playing with this one, so it's a little broken.
Okay.
But that's it. And then there's a big one up there that really flies with a battery.
No. That's the number I was flying, 106. And the rest of it is all on these pair of tennis shoes. So, anyway, I'm standing on the wing of the plane that I landed, luckily, following my engagement against the Soviets. So to take off, we got together as a flight of 4 under the clouds at 400 feet with the blizzard going and driving snow and heavy winds pitching the ship. And climbed in as a formation through this storm, which the tops were 12,000 feet. While in the clouds and climbing, our Combat Information Center, which controls us from the ship, informed us of an inbound flight of bogies, which just means unidentified aircraft. So I knew there was something out there, not normal, it wasn't, we weren't expecting. When I got on top of the clouds at 12,000 feet, it was all clear, and I looked up and I saw 7 contrails coming from the north, still well to the north. And we continued to climb, and they went directly over me, and I could see they were MiG-15s flown by the enemy. And they turned and headed back to the north. I foolishly assumed they were going back to land, that we weren't going to engage. But that was, my assignment was to be prepared to defend the task force against this group of ships. So, the flight leader had a warning light that he might have a engine fuel problem, and they assigned him and his wingman to come back and remain over the task force of ships at 13,000 feet and just stay there until landing. I had a wingman. I'd never flown with him before. I didn't know his traits, how good he might be. But the first thing I did was charge my guns, test fire, check my sighting, radar systems, everything was set to fight. So I climbed to 26,000 feet. When these MiGs at probably 50 to 55,000 feet altitude that I couldn't get to, or even the F-86s were flying on the western half of Korea. But at 26,000 feet, they broke in 2 groups. Again, I assumed they're probably going to go and land. Well, I was ordered to come back and form a formation between the last sighting and the task force, and to patrol it so they didn't sneak by. In that turn, 4 of them, in a formation like this, loosely, came in all shooting. They got big guns, 23 millimeters and a 37 millimeter. I had 20 millimeters. Wow, surprise. So they were coming along, and I made a hard turn around, and I ended on their number 4 guy, the guy farthest behind, in a short burst, and he started smoking, fell out of formation, and was going down. And my wingman left me to follow this guy. Why, I don't know, he shouldn't have. So now I'm alone with 6. And I felt these 3 that repeated that group that was 4. And they, in their capability, went rapidly climbing well above it. It's under the other, to at least 2,000 feet above me, and then turn around to come back and shoot. Well, I was following, and I went after the guy that just lost his wingman, but he was in the sun, and I lost sight of him. But I saw the other 2 already turned around, and they were coming in, and the lead aircraft was firing. So I switched over and aimed at him, and tracked, and when I had solution, I pulled the trigger in a short burst, and I must have hit him. He turned, stopped shooting, and turned out of the way. And I looked over his wingman, and he's coming in at me, and he's firing away. I switched over to him, and got the solution in range, fired, and he stopped firing, didn't maneuver, just slid underneath me, and I think the pilot was dead. Anyway, from then on, it was all of them versus me. And my main attention was to the guy, whoever's on my tail, that was about ready to shoot me down. battle went on for 35 minutes. Longest ever in history. Never. Usually it's a few seconds or maybe a few minutes and it's all over. Well, they had just one guy to play with up here and they just stayed at it and they wanted to kill me. And I was mainly paying my attention to who is coming in from behind. And once I would make a maneuver so that he couldn't hit me, and after he got in range going to pass me, he would again go to a couple thousand feet above me or two, and I couldn't track him at all. And so I'm back now to the next guy who's already back there. Well, one of them slipped on by me and did not do that, and I was able to get my guns on him, and I had the solution. I fired, and he started coming apart and pieces falling. I had to maneuver drastically to keep from hitting him, running into him. Well, this went on, the same sort of thing, and I'm getting shots on that. So I'm now on the tail of one of them, and he's burning. And I was going to fire another short burst and right on his tail. I pulled the trigger and I'm out of ammunition. So I have no reason to be up there to try to stay alive. Well, I'd spent too much time paying attention to him, and the guy that's next up on my tail was right on me. And I turned hard and flipped the airplane over, and he fired and hit me with a 37 millimeter right in the wing butt and into the engine, so the accessory section of the engine, knocking out all the hydraulics and shot off my controls, the cable to the rudder, and the hydraulics to the ailerons, and everything else like flaps, etc. that I should use, normally always use in landing. And now all I have is the elevator. That's the very back of the tail, the horizontal part there. And he's right on my tail, and I suddenly have an almost uncontrollable airplane, and he's firing away. But I used what I have, the elevator, and I push the stick forward and I dive, and he shoot at me, and I see the bullets go over me. Then I would abruptly come up, I see the bullets go under me. I did this all the way till I got into that blizzard snowstorm. And he didn't hit me again. So he couldn't see me, I couldn't see him, and I'm headed already, luckily, toward the task force because I had little control and turning was very difficult. I thought I ought to eject because of the condition of the airplane, but I was so far away from any help, they wouldn't have gotten there by the time I would have hypothermic died in the extreme cold of the winter. So I just kept lowering down, knowing that the bottom of the clouds was 400 feet. And when I got there, on my own, because it was my problem, my controller aboard the ship just confirmed that I was headed toward it. 400 feet, and I saw the task force, and then going into it, there they are, big group ships, and they were at
General quarters.
yeah, general quarters, which is putting it at your maximum readiness to fight. And the rules were for the people with the anti-aircraft guns that if you don't know the threat that's coming in as a friendly, you were cleared to shoot at it. Well, they hadn't notified them that I was friendly. So as I got into this, the ship shot at me. But my commanding officer had just taken off to go up and relieve me, and he saw what was going, and he said he's friendly, so he stopped the action, and now only the problem of how am I going to get back aboard the ship or otherwise survive. They had to take about 10 minutes to move all of the ship's aircraft that were behind the barricade, a device that stops you if they put it up, that if you hadn't caught a wire with your tail off, you would fly into that and it would catch you. So they had to pull all these airplanes forward so the landing part of the ship flight deck would be available. In about 10 minutes, that happened, and I knew it, so I'm testing my airplane to see what problem I might have in landing. Well, I found out that at 200 miles an hour, it would stall out. I couldn't fly in less than that because I wouldn't make it. So I notified the landing signal officer that I have this problem, and he said, we'll cut you. They passed the word to the captain of the ship, who was a pilot, and he said, he's coming in hot. He said, bring him in at any speed he wants, because we had this storm going, providing a lot of wind, and the ship could do 30 knots a day. So they were going really hot when they got in. And then I informed them once they got in and I started making my approach. I was off to the side, and without rudder and ailerons, I just had the elevator, and that didn't allow me to turn except just very gently. And I wouldn't be able to line up with the carrier. And the captain of the ship saw this, and as I got on in, I told him, I can't line up, and they said, we'll cut you for an early wire. Like that would keep me, I'd go right over the side. I'm coming across it from the width instead of the length. And the captain of the ship turned it the last minute, never before happened. Pow, I caught number 3 wire lined up and safely aboard with 263 holes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, but then what follows on is even more interesting. You want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, well, that ended that part of it, but I was warned to never talk about it, ever. I was ordered to go to Admiral Briscoe's office in Yokosuka, Japan. This was our last day in combat for this period, and we were going into replenishing R&R. And I was ordered on arrival to report to Admiral Briscoe. Well, I was ready. We were coming into port. We were in port now, and we'll go alongside and put the ladder on out, or if we're going at a pier, we would have steps to go ashore. On the way down to the hangar deck, I met a second-class aviation bosun mate, and these are the guys that move, control the aircraft, pushing them around and so forth on deck, hangar deck and flight deck. I told him I was the pilot of that plane that was all shot up, and I'd like to see it one more time before I go. I knew it would be offloaded. And he said, sorry sir, but we pushed it over the side. They thought there was no reason to keep it. They took the usable parts off it and then just put the shell in the water. that story was modified, and probably correctly so, by Admiral John Shelton. I didn't know the guy, but he was very important. That's Golden Eagle thing is something to be proud of, to be a member, and I am. But he was at that time interviewing, looking at the bibliography or biography to see whether I warranted being inducted into that group. And he saw my, and it never really made the front page. And he investigated for 10 years before he died at 102. Well, Tammy worked with him for over 8 years. So she's been put through it and knows more about my history than anybody else. She'll correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
But she does.
I just know it because I worked it. But Admiral Shelton heard the story, and the first thing he said was, that guy got screwed. They didn't give Captain Williams the award he deserved. They made up stories that weren't true because Washington wanted a report right away because there was something brand new called NSA, the National Security Agency. And they now had, this is 1952, before any of us were born. They now had the ability to listen to other countries' chatter on their airwaves, and they didn't want anyone to know they could hear them. So they shut it all down, and they never gave Captain Williams the right award for what he deserved. No one has ever been an ace in a day, ever. In 35 minutes, the longest aviation air-to-air combat fight in the history. And because of drones, it'll never happen again. That's just mine.
I was told that when I met Admiral Briscoe, as he closed the door, Lieutenant, what I'm about to tell you, you could never tell anybody again, ever, ever. Oh, and then the first thing he says, what is this message from the Oriskany, the carrier outside, reporting this? They reported the story that the intelligence officer made up for Washington because they had such pressure on him. It wasn't true. And then it came out, I couldn't talk to it, and the rest of the world, it was now top secret and nobody's gonna talk about it.
For 50 years, it stayed hushed.
But of course, at certain levels, they were aware of this, and they thought it would likely start World War III. And Russia didn't want it, Soviet Union, and we didn't want it, so they didn't say anything and we didn't say anything. And I not being able to say anything about it, I didn't talk about it. I didn't go back and correct the record. I just let the lie be a lie. And that's the way it was for a long time.
So what happened to your wingman?
Nothing. He came in and landed after I did. They were all low fuel. I never even looked at my fuel gauge. I was just too busy. And if I'm gonna run out of fuel and die, well, just as good a way as anything else going on.
Captain Williams, he has amazing eyesight. Even at 99, he doesn't even wear glasses. He has an ability to just really hone in on what's around him. And I think that skill in itself probably saved his life. And he credits God for saving it as well. But do you know who Congressman Issa is? Congressman Darrell Issa, do you see him ever on TV? He's been working really, really hard on the political side to hopefully next year get Captain Williams the Medal of Honor for something that he did many, many years ago, 70 years ago.
Name sounds familiar.
Yeah. You see him on the news a lot.
Yeah.
We have his little picture there. You can see him on your way out.
Yeah.
Well, as an outgrowth, President Eisenhower said if elected, he would go to Korea and see firsthand how things are and run the war. He ran World War II. Should do it. Anyway, he became the president, and as such, he was told about this encounter happened while during the election time. And he said, I want to see that guy. And so, as he came to Korea, I was directed to report to see him. And it was a thrill. Not only did I see him, but I saw almost all the other famous admirals and generals of World War II. About 15 of them, Mark Clark, Ridgway, if you know those names.
Secretary of Defense, everybody was.
Secretary of Defense, ambassadors.
But he only wanted to see Captain Williams. He didn't want to see the others.
Yeah, President Eisenhower. That's amazing. That's quite an honor.
Really cool.
Yeah, he had me sit down in the chair, sat down on the arm of it, and put his arm around me. He's the president. I mean, gee whiz. Not my dad. So, the war went on.
It's quite a whole.
Continued in it till the war was over in 1953, and came back to the States, and I deployed on the Boxer for another tour, and was in South Pacific, really off the coast of Vietnam, and the French, who had them as a colony, was really in a war with them, and President Eisenhower pledged that if they asked for our help, we would give it. And so an admiral was flown out from the United States to the Boxer to run the war. And I was briefed on targets with weapons on the airplane. I'm flying a Cougar now, which is a lot like it only it has swept wings. And about to launch, when the determination was made that the French would no longer be in the colonial business and drop our effort to get in the war. So downloaded the ammo and went back to the ready room and didn't engage until 1960. This was 1954, and we didn't really get in the hot war with the Vietnamese until 1964, maybe 65. Maybe. And so I was over there then, 65, 66, early 67. It didn't talk anything about World War II. These are the other wars. Have any questions? I've taken all the talking here. Ask questions. Fire away.
Go ahead, Malachi. You have some written down.
I have a question about World War II.
Louder.
I have a question about World War II.
Yeah.
Where were you, and when did you find out about Pearl Harbor?
I was 16 years old in high school at Clinton, Minnesota, roller skating out in front of my dad's grocery store. And he came out, my brother was there too. Hey, boys, come on in here, the president's about to speak. With some urgency, so people stayed tuned in. They didn't think it was just Mickey Mouse. But when he came on, he made the speech about Pearl Harbor, and that actually we're now at war. And my dad was in World War One, and almost all the big battles over there that the Americans were in. And he wanted to get in this one too. We all felt it was our duty. So I was a kid, I was an Eagle Scout, wanted to serve my country. My brother pretty much likewise. And my dad wanted to go again, but they wouldn't take it. They needed him right where he was because logistics wins wars. So you gotta provide for the troops weapons and food and whatever. And he was super old. He grew up as a farmer as a kid. He was a carpenter, great for building barns and whatnot. And he let the women run his grocery store, and he went out where needed in farms and so forth. So right away I looked into how we would have served my country, and that's how I got in the army.
He was in the Army first, before he went into the
Yeah.
Navy, right when World War II started, he joined.
So when were you sent overseas? Where were you sent first during World War II?
Well, in that I started kind of all over again when I went to the Navy. And I was enlisted for a while, and then I started in the cadet program, where I went base after base after base, flying 4 different types of airplanes, and going to college of sorts. And the only really anything like combat was to keep our eyes open for submarines in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. I never deployed overseas in combat. Until the war was over. Then I deployed in the hot areas, South Pacific, right after the war. And so I ordered Japan and China and all those countries. That's why this house looks the way it looks.
Yeah.
And
So you had to do, was that kind of cleanup work? So you went to make sure that the war was over? So after the war was,
well,
they signed the treaty.
it's funny you say that. I was on Saipan at an airfield that was the Japanese, and we still had Japanese that hadn't given up, that were living out in the jungles. And they didn't really fight us. They would come in at night and steal food, that sort of thing. But they weren't just citizens. Not a real threat.
Saipan.
I went to Nagasaki shortly after the bomb.
Oh.
So I saw the nuclear damage and the fresh.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, they read a book about the bomb. Oh, that was
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
hard.
I was selected for regular Navy ahead of a bunch of college graduates and more experience in combat than I had, and I don't know why. But they wanted all their officers to have at least 2 years of college, so they sent me to the University of Minnesota for 18 months. Wanted me to get a 2-year degree. I got a 4-year degree, and I still had another quarter due me. I just piled on. I took a whole lot of stuff and studied. So they decided to send me to postgraduate school. So I've had a lot of schooling while in the military.
What was your major?
International relations.
Okay. That's cool. Write that down. International. He studied international relations. That would be helpful in the military.
I got an MBA later. And
Okay.
it's question time.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do after the war? After World War II, like in between?
Yeah. Well, I did a lot of things, but nothing important. I got invited to be vice president of a startup company, and this was with two chemical engineers that had all kinds of scientific discoveries. They were fantastic. They worked with a company from Thailand that was internationally big. And the first thing they got a really interesting money thrown at them was big toy company in Los Angeles. And,
Mattel?
Huh?
Mattel? Or is
Yeah, Mattel.
mm-hmm.
But then the Thais and other people that were associated all got out of it and left it to these two guys. So they were the president, and they wanted people to do the work, so they hired me as vice president of the company. Well, make a long story short, they looked like they had all sorts of success. They were on the 700 Club. They were on Dallas, Texas TV, sponsored by the fire department. They made shingles, very popular shingle that burns readily. They made a copy of it
Shingle?
that wouldn't burn. What'd you say?
Shingle?
Yeah, shake. And you couldn't burn it, you could put a torch to it, but it looked just like it. And all over, they had offers from Honda to make shells to ship motorcycles. They got an offer from Israel for piping for fuel and stuff in the desert, in the extreme temperatures in sand. Anyway, now they ran the company, and showed off a lot of their talent. I wrote a letter to Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Tom Hayward, who was a friend of mine, good friend. And he sent what I sent to a bunch of the Navy engineers to study it, to see if they were interested. Because one thing they could do was pour their version of cement into a form in the water and make piers that would dry, harden in about 2 days, and in a week or so they could use it. Otherwise, it's 6 months for cement and everything to handle that. Just great stuff. But they didn't want to do duty with anybody unless they had 50% of the control. They didn't have any money. A lot of people looked at them, they tried to make a deal. They wouldn't do it unless they had 51%. I looked at what was going on and said, this won't work. I quit. And they were going to trial downtown in the federal court, and I went down to listen. And they saw me, oh, Royce, they were happy to see me. The judge wasn't in at this point. When the judge came, they said, gentlemen, or take your seats. The next thing he said, all rise, the judge. He came in seats. He says, is there Mr. Williams in here? I didn't see anybody else raise their hand, so I raised mine. He says, approach the bench. So lawyers for both sides of the battles were there, and they both didn't want me in there listening to what's going on. So he says, I understand that you have had participation and knowledge and so forth, which I acknowledge. He said, you're dismissed. And so they kicked me out of the court. Well, they went to jail and I did not.
Yeah.
So that was the happy part of that. So, I discovered Hidden Meadows in 1965. I had the headquarters for either ship or railway, whatever I had. And I lived in the South Escondido, and I had 3 sons living at home at that time, youngsters. And I was living there, and on Saturdays, if I didn't have to work, I'd go home and get some guns. My wife would pack a picnic, and we all, as family, would look for a place to shoot. So I found this road, dirt road, coming up here, and I went over and popped on down and looked in, and there's nothing. And I saw some people who were making underground facilities for future growth. So I went over and asked them, we'd like to do some shooting, would you mind? They said, who's to care? There's nothing out here. Go ahead. Well, I did that then a few times after that, and now I've got that job with Admiral McCain. Oh, I didn't mention McCain Jr., or the third. He was in A1, they call it, prop airplane on the Enterprise, first nuclear around the world cruise, and I was commanding officer of an F-8 Crusader squadron on there. So I know who he was, and I didn't really know him. A bunch of my junior officers know him. And they didn't particularly care for him.
No. How long would you be at sea then after, so you had young boys at home, would they send you on just a
From,
world tour every once in a while?
6 to 11 months.
Okay.
There was a period of time, in 4 years, I was home maybe 6 months.
Wow.
Not a lot.
Yeah. A long time.
Anyway, we made it around the world. We first did a 6-month tour in the Mediterranean.
Okay.
And then we joined with 2 nuclear-powered cruisers for the first nuclear task force around the world to show our capability to operate without big trio of supply ships. On the way around, we put on an air show for 20-some heads of state, kings and presidents and prime ministers and so forth. And I was the lead pilot to start the air show. I was on number 1 catapult, my wingman on number 2, the section leader on number 3, and his wingman on number 4. And the kings and whatnot are up on the bridge with the captain of the ship, with the admiral. And when I was cleared to launch, I would get the signal ready for catapult, and then on my signal and on the radio to the rest of them to launch, and we went off just bing, 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 in formation of 4 right off the bow. That had so much power as a great airplane. Put it up and usually go through clouds out of sight. But we did this all the way around the world.
Yeah. How? You guys curious? So the catapults on the how fast would you get going from when the
Well,
catapults
100
launched you?
Maybe about 125 knots.
125 knots.
Which converts
Which
to
is
how many
around
miles?
135 miles an hour.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Are we gonna drink?
Yeah, I have cookies too.
Toast to the Navy. So you were awarded the Navy
Cross.
Cross.
It's the highest medal the Secretary of the Navy can award, and it's next to the Medal of Honor. I got the Medal of Honor from Korea, from the President of Korea,
Mm.
in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So they have taken notice.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did it?
Is that what this picture is?
Yeah, that's when I'm receiving the Navy Cross. That's the Navy Secretary and Congressman Isa.
Oh, okay.
Is that in there?
Thank you.
Might not mean anything to these guys, but it might mean something to you. That I'm sure Congressman Isa was behind it. But I got a phone call from Washington, and it was the Navy Department, and they questioned and so forth, and they said that the Secretary would like to speak to you on Thursday at 11:30 or something like that. Yeah, oh, great. Yeah, so I expected a phone call. On that day, I got the call, and they said, the Secretary will be there in a half hour. I said, what do you mean be there? He's coming to your house. But he sat on where you are
Uh-huh.
for an hour and a half. If I were in Washington and some of the jobs I've had there and wanted to see the Secretary, I'd be lucky to get 10 minutes.
Huh.
He was just so, and then he went back, and when he left, he says, I have a decision to make. And he made it.
Cookies.
And so
Thank you.
it was only about a month later, and it was at the Aerospace Museum. I mean, gee, maybe 500 to 600 people there. One of the trying to think of the lady from
Oh,
the Supreme
the
Court.
Supreme Court
Supreme
justice.
Court justice was there. But an awful lot of dignitaries, goodness sake.
Well, I would like
But I
to.
got my family to attend.
Oh, good. So they got to fly out and see that. That's awesome. This was the last picture you need to explain.
Yeah, and that should be updated. The big news is, it shows 4, and the reason that it says 4, because the Navy says 1, is because the Russians said 4. In 1992, when the Soviet Union broke up, the Russians out of Moscow sent a newspaper out with the name of 4 pilots that were
Went down.
shot down that day.
Mhm.
Well, an upgrade. Oh, she's about to show you this. Well, I'm about.
Yeah,
You show. This is a history
You might
book
want to take a picture. I don't, maybe it doesn't go there.
written by a Russian military historian, and it is showing write-ups on mainly the Air Force's part of the war, where the battle for show and headlines between the Air Force and the MiGs, flown by North Koreans and Chinese and Russians and Czechoslovakians and all of the communist part of the world, a lot of them heroes from World War II wanting to be upgraded in the chance of current war. Well, of those that I shot down, one of them was a Russian hero from World War II. But the book by this historian says that only one of the 7 got back. So it looks like there ought to be 6 airplanes on the side.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So this historian then
That's
basically confirmed and verified what happened in that picture of you pointing at the bullet holes.
It's sort of says what the U.S. Navy's been saying is hooey.
Mm.
And that's how it all got started. A big dossier written, and Congressman Issa met with Admiral Shelton many years ago, and has since been leading as Admiral Shelton has passed away. Because every day Don Shelton lived, he wanted this Medal of Honor for Royce more than anything. Even on his deathbed, we got our first citation from the 117th Congress, and he was just so thrilled. And the House did pass that bill. It just stalled in the Senate, so we had to go back and redo it. But I think this time we have representation, and I hope you get to watch it on TV sometime and say, I know that man. I sat with that man. Because he really is a hero, as modest as he is. He should have been killed. You think 7 on 1 is kind of a fair fight?
It was a superior airplane.
I asked Captain Williams, how did that happen? He says, they just weren't very good pilots.
No, Grumman builds tough airplanes. They survived being beaten up.
I'm curious on the side story. Like I asked about your wingman, like what happened to him. He said nothing, but well, like why did your wingman? What was he
Royce, talk
flying?
about the armament switch. Talk about the armament switch.
Oh, yeah. When he landed, the ordnancemen on the squadron come through all the things to make sure everything is safe and offload any bombs or rockets or anything like that, or check the guns. They checked his guns and he hadn't fired 1 shot.
You
And
have
that's
to
your
turn
wingman.
on like a master switch to get them to work, and he failed to do that, and he couldn't fire. And we have that from the Navy historian, retired Admiral
Who
Sam
was
Cox.
very
He wrote
anti,
that.
and
He was
finally
afraid.
turned it around.
He had no way to fire. He didn't. I don't know what happens when people panic. This is what
Yeah.
they're trained to do. But how would you react? You know, if it were you.
So it wasn't necessarily a malfunction thing. It was
He
He
failed.
forgot to flip the switch.
But when that first MiG was shot down in that first turn, he went down to follow it and left Captain Williams up there by himself. And he never returned until the end of the fight, when he was already heading to the clouds.
through the blizzard.
Into the blizzard. Because he knew where his task force was. Back in his day, they didn't have all these
The radios.
classes of learning how to navigate. He had to learn the stars, astrology, to know where he was.
But how about the radios back and forth between pilots, though?
Yeah, they could talk to each other.
Good, but I was just so busy.
You were
I
in
didn't
your
go
own.
back to CIC. I just until finally when I was shot up, I said I could use some help up here.
Yeah.
But that was kind of long.
It was
Nothing
too
they
late
could do
in
about
getting
it.
there.
November 1952. Huh.
You can take the picture if you want to. It's a book available.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I feel honored to be here and to have met you and to hear it from you. So thank you for taking the time to do this, and thank you as well for setting it
Well,
up.
Our big problem now is we're invited to go to France in the annual trip there
Mm.
down to the beaches.
Mm.
And I'm invited to go to Korea again in the fall.
Okay.
Did
The
you ever learn?
Koreans
Did you
are
learn
all
anything? Oh,
over me, and every time they come, they bring gifts. And I've been the spokesperson at their what do we call it?
All kinds
The
of events.
headquarters in Los Angeles.
Oh, the consul general?
Huh?
The consul general?
Yeah, the consulate. But he's been down here, and I've had generals and all kinds of things come to the house, and we formed a friend with the guy that lives over in Carlsbad, I think. Plays at the golf course over there, member. And he came to America after being a hotshot movie star in Korea and Hong Kong. And here he set up a Hong Kong
Taekwondo studio dojo.
studio here. Taught for long. His son now runs it, and he's retired.
But last April, we went to Washington, D.C., and the president of Korea gave Captain Williams the Korean Medal of Honor. The highest medal a military person can receive is the Medal of Honor, given only by the president. And so we got that one there. When you're done, there's a nice shadow box he made with some of his medals, and you could take pictures if that helps your PowerPoint if you want to. Do you have more questions that you've prepared that you want to ask him?
No.
Will you send us a copy of your report? We'd love to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
that'll
guys wanna
make
do
him
that? Write it
shape
up.
We'd love to read it. I think it would be fun. I think it's terrific that your school does this because so many schools don't study the American history, U.S. history like this. So good on you. Mm-hmm. Have you been to the Midway?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool place.
Where is this ship? This plane. Where is that plane?
On the Midway.
Is it on the Midway?
Yeah.
So you'll have to. I think you guys are doing another trip there. You can look for that plane.
Yeah, it's
with
off.
the-
As you come up onto the flight deck, it's off to the
That's
east.
what I say,
And
they ought to add another star or two in there.
And a couple of more planes. That's awesome.
It's a MiG.
It's a big shotgun. That's awesome.
Awesome.
anyway,
Did you ever learn how to speak Korean or anything? Did you ever learn any of those languages? Those are difficult languages.
She's pretty
no,
good at
it's
copying.
hard. I tried to teach him how to say President Yoon, but by the time he got there, he was just said President Yoon.
Yeah. That'd be hard. Well, thank you for letting us come. Can we get it? I did want to ask about this jacket on the back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
that's
I
my
should
flight
take some
jacket.
pictures. You can take it off and look at it. That's
You know,
his
you see
original
several
flight jacket.
others that have a lot of patches.
Mm-hmm.
Wrong. They are one saying, I was at Tonkin Golf, I was here, I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of these is a Navy unit or Air Force unit that I belong to, had orders to. And
You can take
I'm very
pictures
proud
with
of
the
their.
PowerPoint, honey. Do make it good.
Do you mind if he tries it on?
Well,
With your hat, you should put it on. Get your picture in it.
I think
Yes,
you
yes.
should. I think
You get your
should take a
picture taken in
picture.
there.
This is your chance, boys.
Yeah, so
Make a
you,
great report.
it'll be hard for you to ever have this chance to put on this
A
jacket.
real jacket from.
Go on.
Here, I'll take that. That's awesome. Whoa, look at that. That thing is
And then I think
legit.
you should take a picture with Captain Williams.
You
Yeah.
can do a turnaround there. and get it.
Get the backside.
That's so cool.
How old are you?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm 13.
13. And could you believe in 3 years, when you're 16, you would be fighting in a war? Can you imagine that?
That's awesome.
Talk.
No.
Voice.
No.
All right, Warren, try it on. Look at that.
Have you seen the series Masters of the Air?
Do a little circle
I
here.
don't think so.
It's on Apple TV.
Mm.
It's about the Army,
Yeah, it's
Air,
good.
Army Air Force in World War II.
All right, jump in there. I'll get a picture of you.
It's fantastic.
With Captain Williams,
Nine
yeah.
episodes.
Hey, get over here.
That's all
Put your arm
Oh,
on it.
Okay. Masters of the
This is where
Air.
Roger went, huh?
Brilliant
Ready?
done
1,
by,
2, 3.
Spielberg and Tom Hanks.
That's awesome.
Similar to
Yeah.